Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and this week I did want to do a green-red experimental frenzy deck, but unfortunately it didn't quite get where I wanted it to be in terms of competitiveness, so I'm going to hold off on that one until maybe until next week, maybe the week after, I'm not sure. I'm thinking of doing a subscriber deck next week, so that's something that I've got in mind anyway. But this week, instead of green-red experimental frenzy, we're actually going to be running black-white control. So it is a control deck without blue, which means no counter spells. However, we are actually very much favoured against creature matchups with this particular deck. So the reason to run black-white control is usually for the Fountain of Renewal and Dawn of Hope combo. So Dawn of Hope is a 1 and a white enchantment. It says whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. So this is really good against control because it is a mana sink for you in the late game. You don't have to play anything into your opponent's counters. You get it down nice and early, which is underneath all of their Sinister Sabotages and Ionizers and things like that. And it creates 1/1 soldiers which get around their single targeted removal. They can wipe the board, but you can just spend 4 mana again to put down another threat. So in that sense, it is really good against control, but until you get to that point where you can sink a ton of mana into it, you're also going to be drawing a ton of cards with it, thanks to a card called Fountain of Renewal, which is a 1 mana artifact. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life. So as you can imagine, turn 1 Fountain of Renewal, turn 2 Dawn of Hope, turn 3 you gain life with Fountain of Renewal, and you get to pay 2 to draw a card. So immediately on turn 3, you're drawing 2 cards per turn. As you can imagine, if your control opponent is running counter magic, it's going to be a little bit difficult for them if on turn 2 you've been drawing 2 cards for the rest of the game. So that is kind of what we want to be doing with this deck. Also, the incidental life gain is really good against a fair few decks as well. If you are going up against a slow and grindy deck, then the life gain that you are procuring from the Fountain of Renewal will eventually mess up your opponent's clock when they get to their win condition as well. So you get a lot of like Doom Whisperers that usually in a normal matchup only have to get in a couple of hits because of like incidental beats and things like that. But with Fountain of Renewal, sometimes when they actually get down their win condition, you're on maybe 40 or 50 life. So it takes them a hell of a lot longer to actually kill them. And in that time, you are top decking removal and interaction as well. So I'm going to switch to this side. I think is a little bit better to view off of. So that's the main reason to run this particular list. So how do we win? Well, there's a few ways that we win. The main way is by using Karn, Scion of Urza, which is a 4 mana colourless planeswalker for 5 loyalty. It says, tick up, reveal the top 2 cards of your library, an opponent chooses one of them, you put that card into your hand, and exile the other with a silver counter on it. So most of the time, because of the way decks are constructed, it's going to be a land, and either a land or something important. So that something important's mostly going to be sent into exile for the silver counter. But Karn essentially makes sure that you hit your land drops on time. That's the way that I like to see Karn. Most of the time, though, what we want to be using him for is the -2. The -2 says create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So if you minus Karn, you get a 1/1. If you minus him again, you get 2 2/2s. You can also do a fair bit of interaction as well, because you can maybe see that we're running a lot of artifacts in this deck. We've got our 4 Fountain of Renewals. We've got our 2 Thematic Compasses, which will eventually flip into Spires of Araska and mess up the math on the constructs. But you also have treasure maps as well. Treasure maps are really good because they allow you to scry in the early game. 2 mana is really good at getting underneath control. You can pay 1 to scry 1, and then you put a counter on it. If you get 3 or more counters, you remove those counters, flip treasure map into Treasure Cove, and you get 3 treasure tokens, and you can sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. So it effectively means you scry 3 over 3 turns, and then you get to draw 3 over 3 turns. It's superb value. Running 4 copies because it synergizes really well with our win condition, which is Karn. So as I mentioned, treasure tokens and the treasure map all interact with our Space Marines down there, the 0/0s, because we actually create 3 treasure tokens, which means Karn actually makes 4 4s if you're not using treasure map. And honestly, this deck is very strange in how it performs, because most control decks rely heavily on card advantage to win the game. You know, they want to have more counter spells than your opponent has cards in hand. That is the ideal situation. This deck is not so much the case. Because we're gaining so much life gain, we can afford to just not have cards in our hand and then wait on top decks to find our removal spells. We have some pretty good removal spells. We've got 3 copies of Cast Down, which is destroy target non-legendary creature. I've found that this has actually hit quite a lot recently. It seems to be fairly well set up in the meta right now. There's not so much Dominaria flying around, which was the legendary mono format, which was very fun, but made Cast Down very bad. Cast Down's actually got a fair bit of use now. Mono Blue Tempos running Tempest Djinns, that's a great target for Cast Downs. Most Creature Lords for tribal decks are not legendary, things like that. There's a hell of a lot that Cast Down can hit. For aggro as well, because we do gain a lot of life, which is very good against aggro. I will say that this is the aggro-hating control deck. We actually have 2 copies of Moment of Craving. So, Moment of Craving is 1 and a black, instant speed, target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of the turn, and you gain 2 life. In the early game, this is going to kill the vast majority of creatures, especially mono-red stuff, Steamkins, all of that sort of stuff, Gutter Snipes, you know, that kind of thing. The 2 life gain as well is really nice, allows us to stabilize, you know, taking 2 power off the board, gaining 2 life is really solid. It also, the life gain combos with Dawn of Hope as well, because we can gain pay 2 life to draw a card. So if we have 4 mana, we can kill a creature, gain 2 life, draw a card. Solid value in that sense. We did mention Thematic Compass a little bit. It's another card that allows you to make sure that you hit your land drops. As you may notice, we're only running 24 in this deck. Yet again, another weird part of Control is usually they have more lands in their deck. But we actually can consistently, for the most part, hit our land drops. Obviously, RNG is involved somewhat, but I've never really had too much of a problem hitting our land drops, because things like Thematic Compass and Treasure Map allow us to scry, find our land drops, which is what we want to be doing in the early game, either finding our early game removal or making our land drops. So Compass allows for 3 mana to tap, search our library for a basic land, put it into our hand, and shuffle our library. And if we have 7 or more lands, we essentially turn it into Maze of Ith. Spires of Araska is a colourless land that actually allows us to untap an attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So if we are playing against a slow, grindy creature deck, wiping the board is really good. They usually play down 1 creature, and then Spires of Araska keeps it untapped. It really helps as well with the Settle the Wreckages, because if your opponent's only attacking him with 1 creature, then you can just send it right back. So it kind of forces them to attack him with multiples, which is what Settle the Wreckage wants to see our opponent doing. Settle the Wreckage exiles all attacking creatures target player controls, and they may search their library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle their library. So we do give our opponent better draws in the late game, but we're already drawing pretty well. You know, most of the cards that we're going to end up drawing are answers to whatever our opponent has, be it Planeswalkers with Vraska's Contempt or Eldest Reborn, be it creatures on Small to the Ground, which is Moment of Craving or Cast Down. If it's Burn, you know, we're just drawing Fountain of Renewals and just gaining random life gain. We also have Profane Possession as well as one of our meme cards of the deck. I always like to include one random little card that seems like it fits quite nicely, and I think Profane Possession does quite well in this deck. It is a 3 mana legendary enchantment. It says pay 5, white and a black, to exile target creature. Then if there are 3 or more cards exiled with Profane Possession, you can transform it. It adds 1 of any colour mana, and you can pay 4 mana and tap it, 5 mana total, to put a creature exiled with this permanent onto the battlefield under your control. So we can actually steal our opponent's win conditions potentially, so this can be a win condition on its own. Same goes with Eldest Reborns. Eldest Reborn is a 5 mana, makes them sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker, then discard a card, and then we get to put a creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. Worst case scenario, it's probably going to be Arcan. Best case scenario, it's probably going to be one of our opponent's cards. I've managed to play against a green-black X deck recently, and they played Vraska, which is kind of annoying against this deck, mostly because they have 6 mana Vraska that kills enchantments. But I managed to actually slam down one of their Vraskas and ult the 4 mana Vraska from Guilds of Ravnica, and then use one of my Space Marine tokens to actually deal lethal combat damage. It was really fun. So Eldest Reborn allows for some really fun interactions like that. We also have 3 copies of Cleansing Nova as well. Because we are a single targeted removal deck, it is very, very difficult for us. Well, yeah, it's kind of difficult for us when it comes to go wide strategies. So Settle the Wreckage, Cleansing Nova are really good against that kind of thing. 3 and 2 white for a sorcery speed. We get to either destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. So we do have artifact and enchantment hit. The only problem with that is that we're usually running some of our own. So they're going to have a hell of a lot of artifacts or problematic enchantments on the board for us to want to use that secondary ability. But it's there if we need it, which is, you know, it's pretty good. I always enjoy a card that has a there if we need it clause on it. So 24 lands. We're running 7 plains and 11 swamps. We only really have our late game stuff as white mana. We do need a turn 2 Dawn of Hope most of the time, but we're running 4 copies of Isolated Chapel. I think when the next set comes out and we get our Orzhov stuff, this deck is going to get a hell of a lot better as well, so keep that in mind. We will get the Shockland, black-white land, one would assume. I would expect such things. And then we're running 2 copies of Field of Ruin as well to hit the search for Ascanthus and things like that in the control mirrors. So that is pretty sweet. On to the sideboard. Let's go into this one because it's a little bit better to see. We have Control Hate. Duresses is usually the mono-black go-to sideboard tech. So 4 copies of this, 1 mana. Target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. So we can really just eat away at our opponent's hand in the second game. If it's against control, we're just going to start taking counter spells out of their hands, which allows us to make sure that our Khans and our Eldest Reborns resolve, that kind of thing. So we're running 1 copy of Cast Down and 2 copies of Moment of Craving. So basically covering the numbers that we haven't actually played in our main deck. And the reason for that is that sometimes Moment of Craving is really good, sometimes Cast Down is really good, sometimes Moment of Craving is really bad, sometimes Cast Down's really bad. So this actually allows us some flexibility. Early game cards are really good for this deck. There are some matchups where both of them are good, and then we just go hardcore removal. So it's really just a matter of, is the matchup good for Moment of Craving? If it isn't, bring in another Cast Down and cut the Cravings. If the Cast Downs are seeing a lot of legendary creatures, then maybe you just want to cut both and just go for a different option. The different option being something like Ixalan's Binding if you're seeing something like a Lyra or anything of that sort. So we have 2 copies of History of Benalia. Really good against a control matchup. Yet again, if you're on the play, there's a good chance that you can actually get under your opponent's counter spells with a turn 3 History of Benalia. 2 and 2 white to create a night token with Vigilance. And then you get to do that on Chapter 2 again, which is the second main phase. And then your third turn, knights you control get +2/+1 until the end of the turn. I'm sure many of you guys have come across this card. It is horrible to play against in most of the time anyway. Against the control deck though, there are a fair few control decks that just really hate stuff like History of Benalia. Going wide, even in a control deck, going wide with a history is a thing that can actually work out. So we're running 2 copies of that for that situation. We got 1 copy of Josu Vess. This one's also for the control matchups, really. For those decks that use single targeted removal, we bring this one in. 4 mana for a 4/5 with Menace, not so great. However, if we kick it for another 6 mana, so paying 10 in total, if we're going up against a control deck, then getting to 10 mana is not too much of a problem. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you create 8/2/2 black zombie knight creature tokens with Menace. So I think we're doing 20 damage in total with Josu Vess. So our opponent basically needs a board wipe, or they're dead, is basically how Josu Vess runs. Finally, we've got 2 copies of Rituals, so just to hedge that bet against any low-to-the-ground creature decks, as I mentioned, mono red is the one to hit, so destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less is likely to hit almost every single creature in their deck. Oh, excuse me. Well, anyway, guys, that's actually going to do it for the deck tech. I hope you like the look of the deck. If you do, then be sure to stick around to the end of the video. There'll be a link to the matches. I'm going to be doing a competitive constructed league. As of the timing of this video, I've already played 2 matches in it, and I'm currently 2-0. I played against a Golgari, maybe, I think it was Abzan, I'm not quite sure. it was a few days ago. Anyway, I played against that deck and we beat that one. I think it was 2-1 to me. And then we played against Blue-Black Surveil Control and it was 2-0 to me. It was a really, really fun game that I wish that I'd recorded actually, because they were discarding like crazy in my deck. And I basically just set my deck up like I didn't actually need cards in hand. So when my opponent played a threat, I just used my treasure maps to draw several cards, find my removal, kill it. My opponent discarded the cards that weren't important, and then they had a load of discard spells in their hand, and I had nothing in my hand. And I was just casually making Dawn of Hope tokens and just smashing them. So it was really good, and we 2-0'd them, and I really wish that I'd recorded it because it was such a fun little situation. Very unique for a control deck anyway, to perform the way that it did. It's what I like about this deck quite a lot as well. It is quite unique in how it plays, and I do very much enjoy running it as well. So hopefully, if you guys want to see it, be sure to stick around for the end card, and you'll get a link to the matches. There'll also be a link down in the description below, as well as a deck list as well, if I've remembered to put it there. Without further ado though, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that little bell icon, and you get notifications when videos like this go live in the future. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.